Hello, I'm Bill Paul. Like it or not, as car drivers, we have to share our roadways with trucks, bigger than ever before, and more than ever before. If they make you a little nervous, well, it's with good reason. They get into a lot of accidents, serious ones. Tonight, we bring you a special full edition report. We'll tell you what's wrong with these big rigs and what it means to you. Here now is Jackie Perrin with our report, Jackknifed.
You never hear a truck driver talking about how fast he can stop his truck. He always talks about how fast the damn thing will go.
Their usual reaction is that all of a sudden I flipped. I didn't even know it was coming.
Okay, you need the brakes adjusted, the main leaf springs repaired before you go.
Why would a driver that wants to call themselves professional want to operate a vehicle that's dangerously defective?
The tractor-trailer has flipped over, debris everywhere. Again, this ramp is blocked up. No exit from either the 401.
It happens so often, we hardly think twice about it. Just another jackknife tying up traffic, another tractor-trailer across the median, a nuisance. If you live anywhere near a busy highway, it's routine information to go along with the morning coffee, like the weather. But the consequences of a truck accident are often horrendous. The economic cost, for one thing, of losing a truck and its load can be staggering. And people die. In Canada, as many as 8 people every week are killed in accidents involving tractor-trailers. Maybe we shouldn't call them accidents. That implies there wasn't anything anyone can do. The fact is, many truck accidents can be avoided. Even the trucking industry acknowledges that trucking should and must be safer. There's a problem with maintenance. 1/3 of the big trucks on the highway fail routine roadside inspections. Trucks could be more safely designed. And there's an industry-wide concern that many drivers lack training and experience. Put all this together in a 63,000 kilogram rig rolling along the highway at 100 kilometers per hour, what it adds up to is a potential for disaster. Kamloops, October 27th, 1989, 10:30 a.m. A runaway truck carrying steel beams. It had taken a wrong turn off the highway. It ended up down a long, steep grade on one of Kamloops' busiest streets. The truck had no brakes. Cars stopped at a red light had nowhere to go. The truck hit 12 cars. The driver burned to death. 4 others were killed in the crash. One of the victims was 4-year-old Corey James. He was traveling with a neighbor.
He was in the back seat of a car and just never had a chance. You know, the impact was so great on all those vehicles.
Corey's father, Don James, feels the circumstances that led to this tragedy could have been avoided.
Well, it was a combination of driver inexperience coupled with a very unsafe truck. That truck should not have been out in the road.
The driver, Travis Penner, had few hours of long-haul driving behind him. This was only his second trip through the mountains of British Columbia. But it was determined that maintenance was also a major factor in the accident. The brakes on the trailer were in very poor condition. So bad, they were virtually useless. The brakes on the tractor were in good condition, but they had been improperly adjusted. As the manager of a truck dealership, Don James understands the industry and he knows trucks. He fears there are many unsafe trucks and that another terrible accident is just waiting to happen.
We've had many drivers bring their rigs into our shop looking for an excuse for us to come out and look the vehicles over because they're concerned the vehicle might not make it to Vancouver. And in a lot of cases, they were right.
We also talked to truckers who said a lot of companies like to cut corners.
If you get down to the last eighth of an inch of lining on your shoes, or you got cracked drums, they'll say, well, run it this trip and maybe we'll fix it when you get back. And then, you know, maybe when you get back, sometimes doesn't happen until you have a complete brake failure. Once that happens, there's probably people that are going to get killed. Certainly there's going to be a great deal of property damage.
This is about half section of a tractor-trailer brake drum. Weighs about 45 pounds, and this was on the rear brakes in the trailer of a tractor-trailer. And it broke off on the highway, and it went right through the windshield of a car. The driver of the car was killed instantly. The piece of hot metal burnt his fiance's legs, and their car went head-on into a truck coming the other way.
Constable Cam Woolley is an accident investigator and truck specialist with the Ontario Provincial Police.
This brake drum had been broken for some time. You can see it's quite rusty along here. It had been broken in half, and it was just barely hanging on. And it's my guess that the vehicle had not been properly maintained, certainly hadn't been inspected for some time.
The truck didn't even stop when the accident happened and has yet to be found.
Okay, driver? Yep. Can I get you to apply the brakes and hold them down for me?
Road Check 93. Every year across North America, state and provincial vehicle inspectors conduct a 3-day blitz. Trucks are stopped at random for a safety check. This year, 1 out of 3 trucks failed the test.
Did you do a trip inspection today?
Yeah.
Yeah? You didn't notice those?
Oh, I didn't know I could get underneath of it now, please.
How about
getting underneath of it?
How about your brakes? Did you check your brakes?
They hammered down and everything.
They hammered down, but you didn't measure the push rods or anything like that. Okay.
Trucks that don't meet the standards of the test, and these are minimum standards, are pulled out of service. That means the defect is serious enough that the truck is considered unsafe and must be repaired before the driver can continue.
Apply the brake.
In the majority of cases, the brakes are out of adjustment. A truck with brakes out of adjustment, even a little, won't have full braking power. But it's a problem that's easy to fix and easy to avoid. Drivers can adjust their own brakes with a simple wrench. In fact, drivers are required by law to do a daily inspection of their vehicles. It's called a circle check, and brakes are on the list. It's a driver's responsibility to make sure his vehicle is fit.
Hi, how you doing?
But when Cam Woolley stops trucks for inspection, he encounters drivers who either don't do the checks or don't do them properly.
Your own rig?
This truck had several problems, brakes included, that the driver should have noted.
The regulations state, I suppose, yeah, that you should crawl underneath and do a complete nut and bolt type circle check every day. But I don't think there's a person in the industry that does.
Under the best conditions, trucks have only 70% the braking efficiency of cars. That's why when it comes to maintenance, it's the lack of attention to brakes that upsets Cam Woolley the most.
Uh-oh.
While there's onus on the driver to be sure the vehicle is safe, the trucking companies are also accountable. The industry realizes when 1 out of 3 trucks fail the safety test, there's a problem. The Ontario Trucking Association, for example, is involved in a government industry task force to investigate the particular problem with brakes.
Obviously, I can't sit here and say to you that the standard should be changed or that it's not an issue. It is. It's not acceptable to the public, and it's not acceptable to us either.
As the president of the Ontario Trucking Association, David Bradley represents some of the country's biggest companies.
The vast majority of carriers are safe. They have a responsibility to safety. There are a myriad of regulations governing maintenance and inspections. What we have are a lot of players in the industry, and still, despite the net we have, some people are able to get through the safety net. What we have to do is a better job of getting those people and getting them off the highway.
Ottawa, September 12, 1989, approximately 1 a.m. A tanker trailer carrying gasoline was proceeding through a curve across a major intersection. The tanker didn't make the curve. It rolled over, slid on its side, and hit a parked bus. The tanker exploded. There was no one on the bus except the driver, who managed to get out before flames engulfed his vehicle. But Robert Ferguson, the driver of the tanker, was killed. It was a new job. He'd only been driving the tanker a month. It was 3 weeks before Ferguson and his wife Cheryl were to move to their first house.
He came to me to talk to me about it, and I said, you know, is it safe? And in order to try to convince me, he said something that's quite ironic, actually. He said, the only way that one of these trucks will explode is if you ram into something really hard.
The cause of this tragic accident, as in most accidents, there was more than one factor. An underinflated tire, a driver who was new to tankers. But the main cause was the design of the truck. Because of the way the truck was built, it had a low rollover threshold. A truck's rollover threshold, or tippiness, depends on a combination of things. The speed at which the vehicle is traveling, the degree of curve in the road, and the center of mass. A truck where the weight is lower to the ground is more stable than a truck where the weight is higher up. Just when a truck will roll over can be measured on this tilt table at the National Research Council in Ottawa. John Woodruff is the head of road vehicle research at the NRC. He did an investigation and analysis of the fuel tanker crash.
I got a trailer of identical design, tractor and trailer of identical design, and put it on our tilt table and tilted it, and was just astonished to find that its rollover threshold was amongst the worst that we've seen in any vehicle.
Woodruff found this all the more surprising in a truck that carried dangerous goods. He believes this accident could have been avoided. The truck would have been more stable had the tank been lower to the ground.
Had he had a vehicle that had a low rollover threshold or was more stable, I'm certain he would have made it through that particular intersection.
Even the most stable of trucks have a rollover threshold that is only half as good as cars. John Woodruff says we could make trucks safer if we had a rollover standard.
If a driver is unfamiliar with a given vehicle and he gets into say he's driving with a fairly normal vehicle, but then the next day has to drive a vehicle that's tippy, he won't be able to adjust to that very effectively. So I would like to see certain classes of vehicles be brought up to some reasonable standard in terms of roll stability.
The rollover standard that Woodruff proposes would have to be set by Ottawa. Transport Canada makes the rules concerning design of new trucks. Chris Wilson is the Director of Road Safety. Why isn't there an actual rollover standard?
Mainly because the technology to establish that standard is not clear. There is some research that has been carried out that shows that a certain threshold is desirable. But I don't know that there is the technology to draft a standard that would guarantee that these trucks would be safe on the road.
But John Woodruff says the technology is there. It's just a matter of making it a priority.
People have to understand how important it is. We have to understand and realize that rollover threshold is probably the single most important design criteria for heavy trucks.
St. Catharines, Ontario, September 9th, 1992, 7 p.m. The aftermath of a tractor-trailer jackknife. The driver had to brake suddenly to avoid a car that had cut in front of him. He lost control, and the rig cut across the highway onto oncoming traffic. It hit another tractor-trailer. It was a classic jackknife situation, and it points to another design issue. Here's what happens. Even when brakes are well maintained, sudden braking causes the wheels of the tractor to lock, so the tractor loses direction and slides or jackknifes towards the trailer. A camera monitoring traffic flow managed to capture this jackknife as it happened. A jackknife occurs most often when a truck is empty. The brakes are designed for the weight of a loaded truck, so when it's empty, overbraking can occur. A similar action occurs when the wheels of the trailer lock.
That's known as swing out. It'll always happen in a curve, so that as it's going around the curve, the vehicle swings out this way and blocks off the approaching lane.
Once that trailer goes past the point of no return, there's no way to bring it back.
Your history.
These drivers have both had the experience.
As soon as I started to turn, the tractor just started sliding, and didn't matter what brakes I tried, I couldn't bring it back.
5 kilometers an hour.
But there is an answer to jackknifes. Trucks could be equipped with anti-lock brakes. This demonstration of anti-lock brakes is sponsored by the Ontario government. It's trying to convince companies and drivers that new trucks should have them. With the anti-lock brake system on, this truck makes a lane change while braking suddenly on a slippery surface. The driver maintains control. But watch what happens when the anti-lock's turned off. The anti-lock brakes have been available for a few years now. One U.S. company told us that with anti-lock brakes on its entire fleet, it has eliminated jackknifes. Yet it's estimated that only about 5% of new trucks in Canada have anti-lock brakes. So the obvious question is, why aren't anti-lock brakes mandatory on all new trucks? Well, the United States tried that in the 70s, but the technology wasn't fully developed and there were some serious problems. The brakes didn't always work, so the ruling was reversed. For a long time, the trucking industry was understandably reluctant to embrace anti-lock brakes, even when the technology improved. But today, trucking associations endorse anti-lock brakes, and Transport Canada says they might be mandatory within the next couple of years. Cormier Village, New Brunswick, October 8, 1989, approximately 2 p.m. A tractor-trailer carrying logs rolled over as it rounded a curve. It slid into the path of a hayride coming in the opposite direction. Logs came crashing down. 13 people were killed, 45 were injured. A family Thanksgiving reunion became a horrific catastrophe. This animation recreates the accident. The major factor was the way the truck was loaded. The logs were piled onto the back half of the trailer bed. A high center of mass at the rear of the truck made this vehicle extremely unstable.
The vehicle was coming down in this direction and got into...
Corporal John Ride is a senior accident reconstructionist with the RCMP in New Brunswick.
That load configuration, together with the topography of the land here, meaning the road geometry, the curve in the road, the decline of the grade on approach to the curve, together with just the exact speed that was necessary, caused the right side of the trailer to start to lift in the air. There came a point of no return when the entire trailer flipped over, taking the tractor with it. All of this action took place in 6.5 seconds or less.
It was a dramatic lesson that drivers need to understand loading and the dynamics of their vehicle and why a truck rolls over.
This is one of the great challenges facing heavy trucks. For example, a truck could carry potato chips on day one, and on day two they could carry lead bars. And those two cargoes are very different in terms of how they affect the vehicle's performance.
The drivers of vehicles that have been involved in rollover accidents that I've investigated really don't know anything about it. They're extremely surprised and they're very shocked that it happened. Their usual reaction is that all of a sudden I flipped. I didn't even know it was coming.
The biggest mistake drivers make, says John Ride, is with speed. Depending on what they're carrying, they often need to go slower on the curves.
The speed limit as posted is for cars and not for trucks. A tractor-trailer cannot negotiate a curve in the same fashion as can a car, basically because of the difference in the center of vertical mass. Consequently, a driver should be lowering his speed by up to 20% of the posted speed limit in order to negotiate the curve properly when he's driving his rig.
So this is your first time on a flatbed?
Yeah.
Where are you coming from?
An accident averted on the 401 highway near Toronto. the OPP noticed a precarious-looking load.
You probably came quite close to rollover.
I didn't feel nothing.
You're going too fast in the curves. That's all there is to it. What happened there is the lumber truck driver exited the highway and he entered the ramp too fast and the load simply shifted. It would have almost flipped the truck over, and from the position the load is in now, there's no doubt that some of the wheels actually lifted in the air.
The driver of that truck admitted it was his first trip with a flatbed of lumber. It's a good example of the one overriding issue that ties together all the other problems in trucking: driver experience and training.
They get their license, and all of a sudden they're out there on the big road doing the 70, 75 miles an hour, and they don't really have a clue what they're doing.
The industry is expanding. They're requiring more and more drivers to drive this equipment, and they're taking drivers out of truck driving schools. It's just a fact that you're going to get a lot more inexperienced drivers out there.
It's going to have to be from the older guys who have the experience to teach the younger guys that this is the way it has to be done, and that's all there is to it. That's the only way I can see the industry getting any safer.
Roy Penner, a trucker from Manitoba, echoes those remarks from his fellow drivers. It's an issue he's reminded of every time he thinks of his son's terrible accident. It was Travis Penner who was operating that runaway truck through Kamloops. Roy Penner says his son had very little experience.
He had worked in the oil patch for a number of years, and he had done some driving there and moving rigs from one site to another. But he had done very little highway driving as far as highway transportation is concerned.
Travis apparently knew that the brakes on his trailer were not in good condition.
I believe a well-trained, experienced driver would have had the confidence to simply refuse to drive with brakes in that condition.
He caught one pickup truck there and proceeded down the hill, caught my wife's car just at the point of grass here, and pushed her car across here.
Right across the grass here?
Across the grass, and he went up over here through the stairway there.
Larry Vesna's wife, Roland, died in that Kamloops crash, and since that day he has made his own efforts to educate truck drivers. Vesna took a photo of his wife's car and produced 2,000 stickers, which he distributed throughout BC and other parts of Canada.
Just hoping to remind the drivers that this is what can happen if your brakes aren't checked. Everybody.
He believes that one of the problems is the qualifications to drive a truck aren't strict enough.
No idea.
He says he's a good example. He has a license to drive heavy trucks.
But getting the license to drive a Class 1 rig was so simple. I borrowed a single-axle, propane-powered 5-speed tractor unit with a 20-foot highboy, which is about equivalent to a pickup and a boat trailer. And I'm now legal to drive a Super B across Canada, through mountains, snowstorms, anything. I'd be an absolute terror on the highway if I got loose behind the wheel of a truck like that.
Okay, Richard, this is the turn right here.
There are many who agree with Larry Vesna's concern. All you need to get a truck driver's license in Canada is this. You must be 18 or 19, depending on which province you live in. You must have an air brake certificate, which may require a couple of days training. You do a written exam and pass a medical. And you do the road test, which some say is too easy. That qualifies you to drive anything from a 4-axle, 4,600 kilogram truck to the biggest double trailer weighing 63,000 kilograms. Many of the big trucking companies do train their own drivers and let them build up experience gradually, but that's not always the rule. This situation has prompted the BC Trucking Association to recommend stiffer requirements. It's proposing graduated licensing. It would mean that truckers would have to drive the smaller vehicles first and get a certain amount of experience before they could move on to a license to drive slightly bigger trucks, and so on. Getting a license to drive the biggest rigs would take several years. Fergus Savage endorses that proposal. He's the manager of truck safety for the Insurance Corporation of BC. He also happens to be an experienced truck driver.
We've got the cavalier-type attitude of some of the drivers involved in industry. Maybe the same could be said for some of the owners of the companies. We have to somehow get some pride back into this industry. Some parts of industry, and generally the public, have sort of migrated to this idea that, you know, well, if you fail at everything else in your whole life, you could always be a truck driver. And I don't hold with that policy. I think we need to turn that around and say, if we're going to get good, qualified people out there, we need to have some, at least minimal entry-level standards for their performance, so we do indeed have a skill attached to this occupation.
One final word about trucks. There's one problem we haven't even discussed yet, and that's us. The four-wheelers, as the truckers like to call us. You see, we're to blame for a lot of the accidents out there because we simply don't understand that a truck doesn't drive like a car.
They don't give us truckers a break at all. They'll cut you off. You have 80,000 pounds on you. You have big problems trying to stop them. It's unreal.
What about where you're driving along on a street or something like that, or even on the highway, for Pete's sakes? Car's in behind you, comes out, passes you, pulls right in front of you, and then jumps on his brake and throws on his turn signal. That scares the heck out of you.
From a different perspective, those who investigate accidents say the same thing. They remind us that given the state of trucking safety today, it's wise to keep your distance.
If I find a trucker that's on my rear end, so to speak, I'm likely to pull over and let him by. Because if anything were to happen, he'd never be able to stop.
You have to look at this in a realistic sense and look at the numbers of vehicles that we put out of service for major critical item defects, including brakes. You'd much better have these people in front of you than behind you or beside you.
This is Bill Paul. Please join us again next Tuesday evening. I'll have the story of how secrecy in American courtrooms affects the safety of Canadian consumers. Damaging evidence about dangerous products is often sealed away forever by gag orders. And stay tuned now for The Fifth Estate. See you next week.